paper falling where there wasn't any wind. I was standing in that dark hall, the windows sealed, the air unmoving. Yet, sheets drifted down from the ceiling as if an unseen hand scattered them. They fell slow, like snow that didn't have any weight, touching the stone floor without a sound. At first they were blank, pure white, no mark. I reached for one, thinking maybe the storm outside had torn some archive apart. But there wasn't any storm, no rain, no movement at all. When my fingers brushed the paper, ink spread across it like veins breaking open. A name appeared. Not mine, one of theirs. Father Miguel Alvarez. Another sheet touched my shoulder. I looked. The ink was still bleeding onto the page, as if invisible hands were writing while I watched. Monsignor Marco Conti. Then another. Sister Helena Costa. The names came one by one, crawling out of the fibers. I didn't want to pick them up, but the floor was filling with them, and I was surrounded. The air grew heavy. I forced myself to hold another. Dr. Isabel Fournier. The letters formed slower this time, dragging across the surface as though it hurt to write. Captain Marcus Reinhardt, Brother Elias Navarro. I told myself it was nothing but some trick, some projection, maybe ink reacting with moisture. I told myself that, but I couldn't stop my hands from shaking, because one paper stayed pressed against my palm. The ink moved across it in lines that had no hesitation, no pause. It wrote a name with finality. Mitchell Ward. I wanted to let it go. My fingers wouldn't obey. The page clung to my skin like it was alive. The letters were darker than the others, almost burned into the fibers. The edges curled. Heat spread from the center. Then fire. The sheet caught flame without a spark, without smoke. Orange light flared in the dark, and the glow spread up my wrist before the page crumbled to ash. The sound of it tearing apart was louder than any fire I'd ever known. I wiped the ash off, but the black stain clung to my palm. That's when I knew. My name had already been written before we even set foot in Montserrat, and nothing I did after could erase it. I should have left it all behind in Providence. I should have ignored the letter when it arrived, folded under my door, with the red seal still intact. But I didn't. I opened it, and I read every word. Now I'm trying to remember when exactly the choice became mine, and when it was already decided for me. My house stands near the edge of the water. Providence is quiet most nights. The Atlantic wind presses against the windows, but inside my study it's always too still. Books from the Vatican fill the shelves. Not just theology, but the kind of documents people don't mention out loud. Records of failed exorcisms, accounts of visions too dangerous to print in any liturgy. I used to tell myself I collected them for research, for history, for the truth. But the truth never stays where you put it. That night I sat at my desk. The lamp burned low. The seal on the envelope was unbroken, the emblem of the Holy See pressed into the wax. I knew the style. I knew the weight of it. I'd received only a few in my life, and each one had pulled me deeper into the kind of work most men in Rome pretend doesn't exist. When I broke the seal, the letter inside carried the mark of urgency. A team of archaeologists had vanished at Montserrat, an abandoned chapel high in the mountains of Spain. No word from them for 6 days, no evidence of a struggle, just silence. The Vatican wanted me to join an investigative team. They reminded me of my time studying in Rome, my thesis on corrupted liturgy, my prior work on sites where sacred ground had turned hostile. I don't know if I believed I still had a choice. I packed a single bag. I left Providence the next morning. The salt air clung to me, even on the flight across the Atlantic. In Rome, I met the others. Father Miguel Alvarez, a Spaniard with dark eyes and a voice that carried like a man who never doubted his prayers would be heard. Monsignor Marco Conti, older, careful, the kind of scholar who measured every word. Sister Helena Costa, precise, her fingers inked with Latin script from long hours copying and translating. Brother Elias Navarro, the youngest, his zeal bright enough to make him restless. Captain Marcus Reinhardt, tall, silent, the discipline of the Swiss Guard written into every line of his posture. And Dr. Isabelle Fournier, archaeologist, her hands quick and sure with fragments of the past. 7 of us in total, 7 names I should never have learned. The flight to Barcelona was long, conversation thin. Miguel prayed under his breath. Marco reviewed notes he refused to share. Isabel tried to explain how the mountain ranges in Montserrat formed, speaking of stone and fault lines, but I don't think anyone listened. Elias kept staring out the window, lips moving as if he recited to himself. I sat in silence and wondered why my name had been chosen again. By the time we drove into the mountains, the sun was already low. The jagged stone rose like broken teeth against the sky. The monastery itself was still active miles away, but the chapel we sought had been sealed centuries before. The local villagers avoided it. They gave us no welcome, no warning. They closed their doors when we passed. I'd seen that look before. People who live close to something they can't name learn to survive by never speaking of it. The path twisted higher until the trees thinned and the stone grew bare. The chapel stood in ruin, its walls cracked, its windows blind. The gate hung twisted, iron corroded into red dust. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Dust clung to the corners. Ash lay in the cracks of the floor like the remnants of fires no one admitted had burned. We set camp in the main hall. None of us wanted to scatter. The first night was uneventful, or at least that's what we told ourselves. Still, I remember Isabel finding the old clock in a storage alcove. Its face was cracked. The hands moved, but not forward. The seconds ticked backward, steady, precise. She laughed uneasily. "A malfunction," she said. I watched it longer than I should have. Later, when we returned to the main hall, I noticed the statue of St. Joseph at the far end. It had been facing the altar. Now, its head turned toward us. I asked, "Did anyone move that?" No one answered. The second night stripped away our excuses. We slept in shifts, but all of us heard it, a low chant drifting up from the stone below. At first, it was like a hymn, slow, deliberate, in Latin. But then the cadence changed, and I recognized it for what it was. It was a liturgy of the dead, a prayer of farewell, a reading of names. The voice named Miguel, then Marco, then Helena. It named Elias, Marcus, Isabel, each name clear, each syllable sharp, as if the one who spoke stood right beside our beds, and at last it spoke mine. Mitchell Ward. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. None of us spoke until morning. When light returned, we all pretended nothing had happened. But I knew we had all heard the same thing. There was no denying it. On the third day, we found the scrap of paper. It lay near the west door, scrawled in a hand that shook with panic. The letters tore into the page as though carved rather than written. The words weren't long. They were short, desperate. I read them aloud to the others, though my voice faltered as I spoke. The first rule was written like a command. Don't look into the mirrors after dark. The second rule was worse. Don't touch the west door. The third rule warned us directly. Don't read the Latin out loud. The fourth rule felt like a plea. Don't sleep alone. And the fifth rule carried the weight of finality. When the bell rings, don't turn around. I folded the page back into my coat. The others stood silent. Miguel crossed himself. "Superstition," Elias muttered. Isabel shook her head. Marco pressed his lips tight as if he recognized more than he'd admit. I said, "The rules are nothing more than fear, scribbled by desperate men. We'll follow procedure, gather evidence, and leave. The rules don't matter." I shouldn't have said that. Helena was the first to break. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't foolish. She was careful, maybe too careful. But curiosity eats at you when silence becomes unbearable. And silence in that chapel had weight. It pressed down on our lungs until we looked for anything to fill it. We had searched the eastern wall that morning. Behind the dust and the mold, there were words etched into the stone. Not paint, not ink. Carved deep, as if fingers had worked the grooves until they bled. Latin, twisted forms of scripture. I recognized fragments of prayers, but the words bent in places they shouldn't. They looked wrong, like scripture written backward in a mirror. Helena crouched close, tracing the edges with her hand. "It's liturgical," she whispered, "not complete, but I think it's meant to summon response." Marco shook his head. "Don't." Rule 3. We all know it, she glanced back. "If I only sound the first line." "Don't," Marcus said. His voice carried like iron, but she did. The sound left her lips sharp and fragile, like glass breaking in slow motion. The words were Latin, but they bent in her mouth, rolling out in tones that weren't hers. Her voice deepened, then doubled, 2 voices where there should have been 1. She clutched her throat. Her eyes widened until the whites consumed her face. I smelled sulfur, sharp and acrid, pushing through the incense that lingered in the stones. "Stop!" Miguel shouted, lunging forward. He tried to pull her back from the wall. Her body jerked, stiff, like something inside her spine had seized control. The words didn't stop. They poured out faster, rising into a chant. The air vibrated. The stone trembled as if it remembered what those words had summoned before. Then her scream. It tore out of her chest raw and endless, echoing so loud I thought the ceiling would split. She collapsed onto the ground. Her head struck the stone. Blood spread under her hair. Her chest rose once, then nothing. No one moved. The silence after was worse than the scream. The only sound was the echo of the words, still hanging in the air long after she'd fallen quiet. Miguel knelt beside her, pressing his hands against her shoulders. "She's gone," he whispered, his voice cracked. "She's gone." Isabel backed against the wall. "It's not possible. It's seizure, shock, something natural." "There was nothing natural about that," Marco said. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Elias muttered, "Rule 3. "She broke it." His eyes darted, restless, fevered. "She broke it, and this is what happens." "Stop it," I said. My voice was louder than I intended. I needed to cut through the spiral, to force reason into the room. This is panic. It was an epileptic fit, maybe. The air here, there could be toxins. We're in an enclosed structure, mold, carbon dioxide buildup. We can't trust what we think we saw. Miguel stared at me. "You think that was sickness?" His hands were red with her blood. "You think sickness bends voices in two?" "I think fear does," I said. "Fear twists what we hear, what we see. We knew the rules before we came in. She was thinking about them, and her mind—" "Her mind?" Isabel snapped. "Her mind didn't break her neck." The argument ricocheted off the walls. Voices raised, cut each other short. Every explanation pulled us in different directions. Every word widened the fracture. The air was dense with sweat and dust. The smell of blood mixed with incense until it coated the tongue. I could taste iron each time I swallowed. Marcus kept scanning the shadows as if something might step forward. His finger stayed near the trigger, though there was nothing to aim at. Miguel gripped the crucifix until his knuckles whitened. "Don't reduce this to chemistry," he said. "We know what we heard. We know what rules we were given." "And you think some list scratched in panic tells the future?" I asked. "Come on, that page was desperation, nothing more." Marco's voice was low. "Or it was warning. And warnings don't come from nowhere." The tension built until none of us could breathe right, and then the sound came again. Not from Helena, from deeper in the stone. A chant, rising and falling, layered like dozens of throats moving together. Gregorian, familiar, holy on the surface, but the cadence bent, dissonant, like the melody had been turned inside out. The chant filled the chapel, No source, no direction. It pressed into bone, into marrow, vibrating in the skull. The words slid against each other, Latin stretched beyond recognition. I caught fragments. Lux, corpus, mortem, light, body, death. But they didn't sound like prayers, they sounded like accusations. The other staggered. Isabel covered her ears. "It's too loud," she cried. But her voice was swallowed. The chant went through her, through all of us. Miguel began shouting verses of his own, counter prayers. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. Marco joined him. Though his tone wavered, Marcus shouted over the sound, "Positions! Eyes sharp!" As if military formation could stop something that had no face. Elias laughed once, sudden and sharp. The sound cut wrong, more like bark than humor. When I turned, his face was pale, but his eyes shone. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "They're not warning us, they're calling us." "Shut your mouth," Marcus growled. The chant swelled higher. Ash drifted from the rafters, though no fire burned above. Dust fell in sheets. My lungs scraped raw with each breath. I thought I saw a movement in the cracks of the wall, shadows shifting where no light touched. Then it spoke her name. Helena. Stretched, distorted. Her body lay still at our feet, eyes open, lips split with dried blood. The voice dragged her name until it became scream and sigh at once. Then it spoke the next. Marco, then Miguel, then Isabel, then Elias, then Marcus, and finally, mine. Mitchell Ward, every syllable carved like a blade across the air. I staggered back, pulse pounding. The letters of my name seemed etched into my skin. No one looked at me, but I knew we had all heard it. We couldn't deny it. That's when the mirrors cracked. We hadn't even noticed them before. Old glass set high in the walls, blackened with age. The surfaces split in jagged webs, reflections bending. I glanced up and saw myself, but not myself. The figure in the glass moved a half-second too slow, its mouth opening, though I made no sound. Its eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep. Isabel screamed, pointing at her own reflection. It was smiling at her, though she wasn't. Marcus fired once. The bullet punched into the stone, glass raining down, but the reflection stayed, laughing without voice until the shards hit the floor and went dark. The division in us deepened. Miguel clung to prayer, muttering constant fragments. Marco pressed questions at me, desperate, demanding explanation. Isabel shook, repeating, "It isn't real. It isn't real," though her face said she knew it was. Elias only stood back, watching us, lips curling with something too close to pleasure. Then the reflections came again, not in glass but in shadow. Our movements doubled on the walls, a half step out of sync. My shadow turned when I didn't, its head tilted toward me, slow, deliberate. I froze, unable to breathe. Then the torch sputtered, and the shadow was gone. We argued again, voices breaking, until no one remembered who started or ended the fight. Science against faith, faith against fear, fear against reason. But beneath it all was silence, waiting for the next rule to break. And deep in my chest, I knew. We were already inside it. Night came heavy. No one wanted to sleep, not after what had happened. Helena's body was still there, wrapped in a sheet we tore from the chapel's ruined altar. The weight of her silence pressed harder than any hymn. We moved less. We whispered less. Even the air felt reluctant to shift. Miguel prayed without pause, his voice cracked but stubborn. Isabel sat against the wall, her hands over her ears as if she could still hear the chant lingering. Marco kept his eyes on the west door. Marcus paced in short, rigid lines. And Elias was too calm, too steady. He watched us with eyes that glowed faint in the candlelight, not brightness, not color, just a kind of intensity that didn't belong to him. When Isabel asked if anyone else still heard the echoes, Elias smiled. "They're not echoes," he said. "They're invitations." Marcus turned on him. Shut it. But Elias didn't. His lips moved even when no words came. His fingers brushed the stones like he was learning them by touch. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it was nerves, but deep down I knew. Something in him had changed the moment Helena fell. The hours dragged, shadows thickened, the candles guttered. Then it happened. Elias stood, his shoulders squared as if he carried authority he'd never had before. He began to speak, not to us, to the dark. The words spilled in Latin, clean and exact, not fractured like Helena's, not broken, perfectly measured as though he had known them all his life. And the sound, it wasn't only his. The chant multiplied, one voice becoming 10, then hundreds, filling the chapel until the air shook. It came from the floor, the walls, the rafters, each syllable sharpened, each cadence ancient. The names began again, Helena first, Miguel second, then the rest. This time, Elias didn't just repeat them. He intoned them like lines from a ledger. His voice rose, steady, merciless, as if calling roll for the dead. Helena Costa, Miguel Alvarez, Marco Conti, Isabel Fournier, Marcus Reinhardt, Mitchell Ward. Each name was met with the chorus echoing in perfect unison. The sound was suffocating. It felt like the very stones whispered our deaths back to us. I felt the marrow in my bones vibrate, my chest constricted. I tried to shout at him, to tell him to stop, but the words drowned in the sea of voices. Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders, tried to shake him, but Elias didn't falter. His eyes rolled white, lips steady. Voice pouring Latin like scripture inverted. His arms lifted, his fingers twisted in patterns like signs of the cross, but reversed, mirrored into blasphemy. With every gesture the air grew heavier, heat pressing against the lungs. Candles bent their flames sideways, though no wind touched them. The stone itself seemed to breathe under our feet. Marco broke then. His control cracked. He stepped forward, voice cutting sharp through the noise. This place isn't chapel. It was prison. They built walls not for worship but for binding. His voice rose, ragged, desperate. The west door holds the seal. The archaeologists broke it when they opened the crypt. That's why we found nothing. That's why the rules exist. I turned to him. Binding what? His answer chilled deeper than the chant. Belial. The name carried weight. It hit the air like a hammer. The chant twisted at the sound of it, bending lower, darker. Even Elias faltered for a breath, as if something greater than him paused to listen. Then his mouth stretched into a smile too wide, and he began again, louder, as though the name itself fueled him. The others reacted differently. Isabel's nails dug bloody crescents into her arms. Miguel clutched the crucifix so tight the metal cut into his palm. Marcus lifted his weapon, but his eyes betrayed doubt, and Marco only wept, shaking his head, words spilling. This chapel was never abandoned. It was buried, the records erased, the villagers silenced. Belial wasn't defeated. He was sealed, and seals break. The rules weren't warnings for us. They were shackles for him. Isabel's voice cracked. Then we're not being protected? No, Marco said. His face was wet with sweat, his eyes locked on Elias, who still chanted, We're prisoners now. We're the names in the liturgy. Each broken rule frees him more. Miguel shouted over them, Then we stand, we hold fast in faith. He pressed the crucifix high, shouting Latin prayers of his own. But the crucifix shook in his grip, the metal hot, smoke rising from the edges. His voice cracked into sobs. He dropped to his knees, kissing the stone to keep himself from screaming. Marcus pulled his weapon again, pointing it at Elias. End this, now. The chant kept climbing. Elias's voice merged with the many, his words smoother than any priest I'd ever heard. It was possession, or worse, collaboration. His lips smiled as they moved, like he enjoyed each syllable. His chest rose and fell with inhuman rhythm, breathing not like man but like furnace. Each exhale burned the air, spreading the stink of sulfur and ash. Then Elias spoke a line we hadn't heard before. Not names, not prayer, but declaration. Belial venit, vinculum fractum est. Belial comes, the chain is broken. The chorus answered with thunder that split the rafters. Dust poured like rain. Marco's voice broke into sobs. Don't you understand? Belial never lay dormant. He's been waiting. The paper wasn't rules. It was the contract, and now were the next signatures. I forced the words out past the pressure in my chest. What do you mean? Marco looked straight at me. His eyes were wide, terrified, but clear. Belial's never been buried. He's never been chained. We're the ones chained. We're only the next names written down. The liturgy isn't for the dead. It's for us. We're the obituary. The chant thundered. Every word Elias spoke was echoed by hundreds, layered in tones that split the skull. The floor pulsed with heat. Cracks spread along the stone. Dust rained. The west door throbbed like it had veins. Somewhere below, something vast shifted. Isabel screamed, "Stop him!" She lunged, clawing at Elias's arm, but was thrown back like she'd struck an unseen wall. Marcus fired a shot into the ceiling, stone splintering. "Elias! Enough!" But Elias laughed, the sound not his own. A chorus laughed with him, 1,000 throats mocking in unison. Miguel crawled toward him, pressing the crucifix forward. "Christ, protect us!" he cried. The metal glowed red. Miguel's skin blistered where he touched it. He screamed but didn't let go. And Elias only leaned close, whispering words that made the crucifix shatter. The pieces hit the ground, smoking. The air turned liquid, thick, hard to breathe. The walls bulged as if the stone itself tried to inhale. The chant built until my vision blurred, and I understood with absolute clarity. Marco was right. The rules weren't shields. They were nails holding the coffin closed, and we were the wood splintering around it. The corruption began not with a scream, but with a sound too small for reason. Glass hairline cracks spreading across the chapel's old mirrors. One by one, they fractured, spiderwebbing in silence. Then the reflections shifted. Not copies, not ours. The figures behind the cracks moved slower, then faster, out of sync. My reflection stepped forward when I didn't. Its mouth opened, wide, unending, though mine stayed shut. I turned away. The reflection kept walking. The shadows joined in. They peeled themselves from the wall, following us with steps we didn't take. Marcus cursed under his breath, weapon raised, but you can't shoot a shadow. Miguel clung to his cross, whispering prayers faster, louder, until the words blurred. Marco's lips trembled, though no sound came. He stared at the west door, eyes wide. Isabel pressed her back against the stone, whispering, "It isn't real. It isn't real." But her reflection laughed at her through the cracks. Then came the crying, thin, fragile. A newborn's cry, echoing from the floor beneath. It multiplied, filling the chapel with weeping that had no source. The sound drilled into bone, hollowing thought, reminding us of something far more helpless than ourselves. The crying rose, twisted, until it was almost laughter. We covered our ears, but it lived inside us. You can't block sound when it's already under your skin. We tried to stay awake, huddled together in the main hall, but exhaustion is as cruel as hunger. One by one, heads dropped, eyes closed, even as the crying continued. When my eyes opened at dawn, Isabel's sleeping bag was empty. She'd taken the far alcove away from us. She broke Rule 4. The stone floor showed streaks where she'd been dragged. No body, no scream, just absence. Her voice joined the crying, faint but certain, repeating like a loop. One more reflection that wasn't coming back. Panic tore through us. Marcus barked orders. "Stay close! Nobody separates again!" His voice was hard, but there was fear under the steel. Miguel shouted back, "She's gone because we failed to keep faith. This is punishment, not chance." Marco snapped, "Faith doesn't matter when the rules are already broken." The two men nearly collided, shouting, hands raised, and Elias stood at the edge, smiling, lips moving in silent prayer to something that wasn't God. The bell came next. Not outside, not above. Inside our heads, tolling slow, one note stretched until time broke with it. Marco froze. His hands shook as if the sound itself pulled him by the bones. "Don't turn," I hissed, "don't!" But his body betrayed him. His head turned despite his eyes filled with terror. He looked behind when the bell called. His eyes froze, his chest seized, and he collapsed where he stood, dead before his body hit the floor. Rule 5. Never turn when the bell rings. He hadn't lasted the toll of a single note. Miguel's faith broke with Marco's fall. He rose, his voice cracking into a shout. He prayed louder than the bell, louder than the crying. Verses poured out of him until his throat bled. But the louder he prayed, the louder the laughter grew. It mocked him, word for word, prayer for prayer. His voice mirrored in 100 throats that belonged to no man. The sound drove him to his knees, his crucifix bent in his grip. His faith, too rigid, too absolute, broke under its own weight. His scream ended in silence, and the laughter stayed, curling inside the rafters like smoke that had no fire. The air itself thickened, pressing down like water. We staggered to stay upright. Marcus barked orders, "Stay together, eyes forward!" His soldier's training held him where faith and reason both failed. I clung to his voice like rope in flood. But Elias stepped forward then, no longer pretending. He smiled, lips split too wide, eyes too bright. He called my name, called Marcus's name, his voice a perfect harmony with the unseen choir. Marcus lunged, firing, but the bullets sank into nothing. Elias laughed, rushing him, teeth bared like an animal. They grappled, flesh against flesh, bone against bone. Marcus roared, slamming Elias into the wall. "Run! Mitchell!" he shouted. But I didn't. I couldn't. I watched as Elias whispered words in Latin, pressing them into Marcus's ear like poison. Marcus resisted longer than I thought possible. His arms shook with the strain of holding Elias back, blood streaking from wounds invisible. Every time Elias hissed a reversed scripture, Marcus countered with raw force, grinding his teeth, pushing back like a wall against floodwaters. His eyes found mine once. "Stay alive," he said through blood. Then Elias's knife slipped between his ribs. Marcus gasped, shuddering, but he didn't fall. He held Elias close, crushing him in one last embrace, refusing to give him victory easily. Only when his knees buckled, only when his grip failed, did the blade twist deeper. He shoved me aside again, his final act of defiance. Then he collapsed. His breath rattled once, then nothing. Elias grinned through the blood. The shadows applauded. I swear they did. Hands clapped from the walls, though no body stood there. The sound was deafening. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it stayed. Marcus's body twitched once, then stilled. His weapon clattered to the floor. Elias kicked it aside, still smiling. "Faith, reason, steel," he said, "all of it breaks the same." His voice wasn't his anymore. It carried weight, centuries old, like Belial spoke through his lungs. I should have run. I couldn't, because that was when I saw it. Not Elias, not a shadow, something else. The hall trembled, bleeding from the stone. The crying and laughter both hushed, as if something greater had entered. In the hallway beyond, where the walls wept rivers of blood, something vast moved through the flood of red. A figure, tall, shoulders hunched, eyes burning crimson through the dark. Claws dragged sparks across the stone. Every step made the walls quake, dust falling in sheets. The air seared my lungs, thick with sulfur. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The silence around it was louder than any chant. Asmodeus. He advanced 3 steps before vanishing back into the blood, but each step stole the strength from my body. My legs locked, my vision blurred. I felt him inside my thoughts, peeling them back, exposing everything I had hidden. The moment his eyes caught mine, I was unmade. Every sin, every doubt, every failure burned through me. I dropped to my knees, sobbing, unable to hide. I felt Marcus's blood still warm on my hands, and I knew nothing I had done, nothing I could do, would matter. The rules weren't for salvation, they were chains, and the chains tightened with every heartbeat. I don't remember leaving the chapel, not the door, not the path, not the way the mountain swallowed sound. I only remember the mist, thick and pale, curling around me like a shroud as I stumbled down Montserrat. My body moved, but I don't recall giving it order. Every step hurt, every breath clawed. The mountain was endless, stone rolling into stone, until the clouds took the sky and the ground vanished under me. I don't know how long I walked, hours, maybe days. The mist never broke. It pressed against my eyes, it coated my skin, it clung to my mouth until breathing was like swallowing cloth. I thought I heard voices in it, Marcus calling, Isabel pleading, Miguel praying. But when I turned, there was only white. Each step felt like moving deeper into memory instead of farther from the mountain. At times I was sure I hadn't moved at all. By the time I reached the base, the sun had risen, though it gave no warmth. The light was colorless, sick, like a lantern burning behind a veil. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I turned, I knew the bell would ring again, and that would be the end of me. So I walked, blind, hollow, alone. The days after blurred into one another. I crossed borders, airports, security, faces. I moved through them like a ghost. No one stopped me, though I had no luggage, no words. I answered questions without memory of speaking. I must have shown a passport. I must have boarded planes. But I don't recall. The only thing I carried was the weight of names carved into me. And then I was home. Providence. The same ocean air drifting through cracked windows. The same wooden desk near the window, worn by years of ink and salt. The walls lined with books I once trusted. They looked smaller now. Worthless. Pages and pages of words that meant nothing compared to what I had seen. I sat there as if none of it had happened, as if my body had returned, but the rest of me was still in Spain. The Vatican sent me files, reports. They wanted my testimony, my record. But when I opened the folder, every page was blank, not missing, not redacted, just blank. White paper that stared back at me with more accusation than any question could. I searched for words, for proof of what I had seen, but the more I looked, the less there was. Blank pages stacked until the weight bent the table. Silence bound in paper. It was worse than being denied. It was being erased. And then the wall began to change. It was late. The lamp throwing weak light across plaster cracked with salt air. At first I thought it was shadow, lines forming, faint, curling like veins under the skin. But the lines sharpened, they deepened, letters. Latin carved into the wall without hand or tool. I pressed my fingers against the plaster and it was warm. The words dug deeper with each night. Not scripture, not prayer, names, Helena, Marco, Miguel, Isabel, Marcus, each etched with precision, blackened edges raw as if burned into the stone. I touched Marcus's name once and felt blood wet against my palm, though none was there. I smelled iron in the air, salt mixing with copper, as if the sea itself had turned to blood just outside my window. I backed away. The list grew each night, crawling higher across the wall. Every letter sank into me like weight on my chest. Every name was a body falling again, and always, at the bottom, a space left open. Blank. Waiting. The blank wasn't clean, not really. Lines shifted faintly under the plaster, curves hidden until the light hit at the right angle. I told myself it was illusion, that I was exhausted, unwell. I told myself the mind invents horrors when it can't reconcile truth. But each night the gap seemed smaller. The wall breathed. The plaster pulsed faint like flesh. And in the lamplight, I saw faint strokes forming where the blank space had been. The start of letters. The faint outline of my own name. I don't sleep anymore. I sit at the desk, listening to the waves strike the shore, watching the wall as the words crawl higher as the empty space closes. The lamp buzzes, the plaster shifts, the names deepen. I thought I escaped Montserrat, but I didn't. I only carried it here. It lives with me now, carving me into its record, and I know, with a certainty that crushes me, the list will not remain unfinished forever. I think I'm free. I act like I'm free. But each night I see the blank fade, lines curling until they almost shape letters, and every morning I wake to find the gap smaller. It won't be long. My name waits. Mitchell Ward. Written before I take my last breath. If you're listening, take this as warning. Don't answer their call. Don't open the letter with the Vatican seal. Don't board the flight they arrange. I thought I was chosen because of study, because of skill. But I wasn't. I was summoned like the rest, one name after another, dragged into a liturgy older than the walls of Montserrat. And now I live with the truth that every summons ends the same way. There are no exceptions. There is no salvation. The sound of the obituary doesn't fade. It waits, patient, curling at the edge of sleep, whispering the names of those who've already gone. I hear them still. Helena, Marco, Miguel, Isabel, Marcus. And sometimes I hear mine, faint, half-formed, as if the voice is letting me believe in distance before it closes the space entirely. The nights are the worst. I lie awake, staring at the wall where the plaster moves, and I hear the chant begin again, low, like a hum under the floorboards. It starts with one voice, then becomes hundreds, and the cadence never changes. It's the same rhythm that carried them to death, the same rhythm that follows me even here. Sometimes I feel the bed shift with it, as if invisible hands beat the pulse into the frame. Other times, I wake to find my name almost formed in the sound itself, letters hidden in the echo, waiting for me to recognize them. I write this not to save you, because saving isn't possible. I write because silence is worse. I thought silence would protect me, but silence is only invitation. The chant grows stronger when you deny it. And I know that one day, whether I resist or not, the last page will turn and the voice will speak my name without hesitation. Then all I've done to resist will mean nothing. You can ignore this, pretend it's madness. I'd almost prefer you do. Because if you believe me, you'll live every day like I do, waiting for the voice to arrive, waiting for the letters to finish carving themselves. Faith won't protect you. Reason won't protect you. The rules don't protect anyone. They only bind. And once your name is spoken, you're bound. Bound until the last letter is written, until your breath matches the rhythm of the chant. So listen carefully. If Vatican calls your name, don't go to Montserrat. Don't listen for the bells. Don't listen for the obituary. Because when it reaches your name, it's already too late.